There is a particular quality to the light just after 10 o'clock on an autumn evening. Not the last bright flare of sunset, not the full dark of midnight. Something in between. A softening, a settling. The sky outside Eleanor's cottage window had gone the color of blue-gray velvet, and the first stars were appearing one by one, as if the night were taking its time, not rushing anything. Eleanor noticed this the way she had started noticing many things lately. Slowly, with a kind of quiet attention she hadn't always had time for. She was 58 years old, and she had recently become, as she privately described it, a student of sleep. Not out of obsession, not from despair, but because her sister Vivian, who was a sleep researcher at a small university in the north, had said something to her over the phone one afternoon that had lodged itself gently in her mind and refused to leave. The hour before midnight, Vivian had said, in that unhurried way she had, is the most restorative sleep your body will ever get. The science is quite clear about it, and most people have no idea. Eleanor had been standing in her kitchen when Vivian said this, half listening, pouring the last of the afternoon tea down the sink. But she had stopped, set down the cup, and listened properly. "Tell me," she had said, and Vivian had. Now it was a Tuesday evening in October, 3 weeks after that conversation, and Eleanor was doing something she had never quite managed before in her adult life. She was preparing for sleep the way she might prepare for something she actually looked forward to. She moved through the cottage without hurry. The dishes from dinner had already been washed and stacked. The back door was locked. The small lamp in the hallway cast a low, soft light, and Eleanor had stopped turning on the overhead lights after 8 o'clock, which was new. Vivian had explained that bright overhead light in the evening confused the brain, kept it believing the day was still happening, still demanding things. But low, warm, quiet light, the kind that resembled dusk, told the brain something different, something true, that the day was ending, that it was safe to begin the long, slow turn inward. She made herself a cup of something warm. Not tea, not this late, just hot water with a small slice of lemon, which she had read somewhere was a kind thing to do for yourself in the evening. She carried it to the sitting room and settled into the chair she thought of as hers, the one with the rounded arms and the cushion that had shaped itself over years to exactly the weight of her. The cottage was quiet in the way that only old buildings are quiet, not silent. There was the occasional soft tick of the radiator cooling, the muted sound of wind moving through the oak tree at the garden's edge. Somewhere distant, a single car passed on the lane and was gone. Eleanor let herself simply sit. This, too, was new. She had spent decades filling every available moment of evening with doing, answering messages that could have waited, watching things on screens that she often couldn't quite remember the next day, letting her mind run in long, anxious loops about tomorrow, about next week, about all the things that remained undone. And then falling into bed already depleted, already halfway into a kind of low-grade alarm, and wondering why sleep was so fitful. Why she woke at 3 in the morning with her heart beating too fast and her thoughts already churning. Vivian had a word for what was happening in those late, bright, busy evenings. Cortisol. The body's wakefulness chemical still circulating, still keeping everything braced and ready. Sleep could come under those conditions, Vivian had explained, but it arrived late and it arrived thin. The deep, rebuilding kind of sleep, the sleep that restored the immune system and consolidated memory and cleared the day's accumulated debris from the brain, that sleep required the body to have already begun its descent before the head hit the pillow. And the descent, it turned out, could be chosen, could be invited, could be prepared for like a guest you genuinely wanted to welcome. This was the thing that had struck Eleanor most. Not that she was doing something wrong, but that she could do something differently, something gentle, something that felt, the more she practiced it, less like discipline and more like a small, recurring gift to herself. She finished her hot water, set the cup down on the little side table, on top of a book she was reading about birds. She had been reading it for weeks, slowly, in small installments, and she found that reading about birds at night made her feel calm in a way she couldn't entirely explain. Perhaps because birds slept too. Perhaps because something about their small, warm, unremarkable constancy was steadying. She read for a while. The room stayed quiet and low-lit. Eleanor turned pages without urgency. Every now and then she paused on a paragraph that pleased her and let it sit in her mind for a moment before moving on. At 10:15, she closed the book and set it down. This was the part Vivian had described as the golden hours beginning. Not sleep itself, not yet, but the approach to sleep. The slow preparation of the body's systems, the easing downward of the breath, the natural rise of melatonin in the bloodstream, that gentle chemical tide that the body produced in the dark, in the quiet, without being asked. It only needed the conditions, the low light, the stillness, the absence of demand. Eleanor stood and moved to the bedroom. She had changed this room slightly in recent weeks. Nothing dramatic. She had moved the phone charger to the hallway so the phone stayed there overnight now, out of reach. She had added a second blanket to the bed for this time of year, because she had noticed that she slept more deeply when she was neither too warm nor too cool, but held at just the right temperature, the way something well-tended is held. She had put a small notebook on the nightstand, and on evenings when her mind felt busy, she wrote 3 things in it before turning off the light. Not a gratitude list, exactly, more like a brief accounting. A way of telling her mind, I have noted this. You may put it down now. Tonight her mind was fairly quiet. She wrote 2 things, crossed nothing out, and closed the notebook. She lay down. The pillow was cool against her cheek and then, within moments, warmly matched to her. The blanket settled over her shoulders. The room was very dark, the curtains drawn against the faint glow of the lane, and the darkness was absolute and comfortable, the darkness of a room that had been made ready. Eleanor thought briefly about what Vivian had said about these particular hours. The brain, in the early part of the night, spends most of its time in slow-wave sleep. Deep, slow, profound. This is the sleep of physical repair, of the body doing its quiet work, cellular restoration, the consolidation of what was learned, the clearing of waste products from the brain that accumulate across the waking hours, a kind of overnight housekeeping that only happens in sleep and happens most abundantly in the deep, early portion of the night. Each cycle lasts roughly 90 minutes, Vivian had said, and the first 2 cycles, the ones that fall in the hours before midnight for someone who sleeps at a sensible hour, are the richest in this slow-wave depth. Later in the night, the cycles shift. More dreaming, more lighter sleep, valuable in its own way, but different. The early hours were the foundation, the golden hours. And Eleanor, lying in her warm, quiet, properly dark room at 10:25 on a Tuesday in October, was at the very threshold of them. She let her breath come and go without directing it. In through her nose, very naturally. Out slowly, the way a long sigh releases, but without effort. Her shoulders, which she hadn't noticed were slightly raised, eased downward. The muscles of her face, which she hadn't noticed were slightly held, let go of whatever small expression they had been maintaining. She thought about the oak tree at the edge of the garden. She had looked it up once. It was probably 200 years old, that tree. It had stood through countless autumn evenings exactly like this one. It had dropped its leaves and grown them again more times than she could easily imagine. Tonight it was doing what it always did at this hour, standing in the dark, breathing in its slow, arboreal way, utterly without urgency. She thought about the birds in the hedgerows, tucked into whatever warmth they found, small hearts slowing, small bodies going still, sleep arriving in them as naturally as tide. She thought about Vivian in her house in the north, who probably, Eleanor realized with some amusement, went to bed at a sensible hour herself, who had spent her career studying the architecture of sleep and had concluded, as people who study things carefully often do, that the simplest things were the most important. The dark room, the quiet evening, the unhurried hour of descent, the body allowed to do what it had always known how to do, given half a chance. Eleanor's thoughts were becoming less sequential now. This was familiar to her these past weeks. The way thinking slowly lost its edges in this room at this hour. The way one thought would trail into another that was only loosely connected, and then into something that was more image than thought. The oak tree became briefly an image of an enormous bird, which made no particular sense and didn't need to. A door in a wall she didn't recognize. A color she couldn't name, but that was pleasant. This was the threshold. Vivian had a name for it too, of course, hypnagogia, the borderland, the liminal state between waking and sleep where the brain's strict editorial control begins to relax and images arise without narrative logic, without the need to mean anything. Eleanor found she had come to love this place. After years of dreading the transition to sleep, lying rigid with wakefulness, running through tomorrow's list, cataloging anxieties, wondering why she couldn't simply let go, she had discovered that the threshold was not a struggle. It was a dissolving. And dissolving required nothing of her. Nothing at all. Only this. The room, the dark, the quiet breath, the knowledge, and it was a knowledge that had settled into her bones over these past weeks, a warm, cellular certainty that her body understood exactly what to do next, that the biology of it was ancient and reliable and needed no supervision from her conscious mind, that the night knew how to hold her. The first 90 minutes would be the deepest. Her blood pressure was already easing downward, she knew, in the way that one knows facts that live in the body rather than the head. Her heart rate, which had wound itself somewhat tight during the day's small stresses, was lengthening and slowing. The growth hormone that her body would release in the first hours of sleep, the one responsible for tissue repair, for the small, quiet work of healing, was already beginning to stir. All of this simply because she had come to bed before midnight. Simply because she had given herself the golden hour. The oak tree outside. The stars she could no longer see but knew were there. The lane, empty now. The cottage, which had been standing long before she came to live in it and would, in all likelihood, be standing long after, and which had absorbed into its old walls the sleep of other quiet lives, other evenings, other women who had lain in similar rooms and let the night receive them. Eleanor's breathing was very slow now. Not measured, not controlled. Simply slow, the way deep water is slow, moving with tremendous, unhurried power beneath its surface. She was not trying to sleep. She had stopped trying to sleep somewhere in these past weeks and found that sleep came more readily without the trying. That was the paradox Vivian had mentioned almost as an afterthought. The trying was the obstacle. The reaching for sleep pushed it back. But the settling, the simply settling, and the trust that the body's wisdom was sufficient, that opened the door. A color. Deep blue, the blue of the sky an hour ago, but moving. A sound that wasn't a sound. The sensation of being very gently held, which was only the blanket, only the mattress, Only the fact of being horizontal and warm and safe in a locked and quiet house on an ordinary October evening. Only this. Eleanor was at the very edge now. She could feel it not as a presence, but as an absence. The absence of the need to do anything. The absence of the day's accumulated weight. The absence of tomorrow, which had retreated, as it always did at this threshold, to a place that was still real but not urgent. Tomorrow could wait. Tomorrow was hours away. There was only now. The slow breath, the dark room, the oak tree and the stars and the body's ancient, faithful intelligence moving her gently, inevitably, into the restorative deep. The golden hour had begun. And Eleanor, without knowing precisely when it happened, without the transition announcing itself, had crossed into it completely. The night held her. The night knew exactly what to do. And she, for the first time in a long time, had simply let it.